Okay. So in the first video where he's over curled the neck and you have a more consistent ring contact, you're
Oh, you mean
basically
overcurl down in the neck? Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
Yeah. And so that what I saw in the first video was that it just very traditional kind of training. Very, what we learn when we do some dressage training and that. And the consistent ring contact for him wasn't helping him actually engage the hindquarters. He was sort of still holding through the neck. And
Mhm.
so now, how long has it been he's been more consistently lengthening the neck?
Um, for 3 weeks, but not like we're not doing this consistently because I'm trying to get him used to riding out in this so we can go to this other field, this other jump ring.
Hmm.
So we're doing it in the ring like every other day, and then we're riding out every other day.
Okay. And so, but he's having more time because you really did a great job. Your balance and position is fine for where he needs to change. The focus is sort of on him right now.
Okay.
And as you worked on the straightness, he started to go into long and low pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And so now if he's been kind of holding through the neck for some period of time and it's still relatively new that he's more and more frequently really lengthening the neck, that change, because when you get what I would call an authentic long and low posture, it's not
Mhm.
balance, but it creates a lot of muscle suppleness through the top line. And basically, what's happening is when you stabilize, when you reduce all lateral bending of the spine and you stabilize the alignment,
Mhm.
and then you're also stabilizing the function of rotation, which is why he pushes you up
Yeah.
on one side of the saddle or the other.
Mhm.
That combination, if they have a minimal amount of hindquarter engagement, as the skeleton stabilizes, chronic patterns of muscle shortening contraction
Mhm.
lengthen. So the
Okay.
body is essentially transitioning from muscular, like using the muscles to stabilize movement, into using skeletal coordination to stabilize movement. And that
Oh, okay.
transition, it's just kind of like if the skeleton is not stable or well coordinated, the muscles instantly kick in. So as
Okay.
soon as you start improving the coordination and the use of the spine in particular, the top line muscles instantly restore suppleness. And
Mhm.
so it's happening at the same time, little by little, kind of coming and going. Sometimes the muscles kick in, sometimes the spine is sort of stable enough that the muscles let go. And
Okay.
so that voluntary lengthening of the neck, and then
Mhm.
they fall into long and low because it's not enough spinal flexion for them to control their own body weight. That's how
Okay.
long and low is becomes the result. But at least we know at that point they're no longer pushing the spine down, which is always associated with a shortening contraction of the muscle. Does that make
Okay.
sense?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So a short neck means the back muscles are also short, which also indicates the back is pushing down.
Mhm.
And so as you stabilize that straightness, as soon as the back quits pushing down, it's not really lifted enough for them to be in balance, but it's lifting, it's changing direction enough that the muscles no longer have to work so hard.
Mhm.
And that's what results in the spontaneous lengthening of the neck. And then they fall into long and low.
Okay.
It's kind of that. So people think once the horse is in the posture of long and low, that's when the stretching begins.
Mhm.
And it doesn't. The what we might consider a stretch is really a release of muscle tension through the chain of muscles along the top line, including the neck,
Mhm.
because the skeleton gains stability.
Okay.
So
That makes
that's
sense.
what
Yeah, I've heard that
happens.
before from,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay.
And so from long and low, we would move towards increasing spinal flexion, increasing hindquarter engagement to get them off the forehand and improving the balance. But right now, just getting the consistency of long and low is sort of the first step for where he's at. And as
Okay.
he does that, because it's sort of this the body's requirement is stability. So it's either going to be through a well-coordinated skeleton or it's going to be through muscle tension. It's going to
Okay.
be one or the other. And as you're making these changes, when you when a muscle has been contracted over a period of time and overused, it depletes the circulation to the muscle and the muscle flattens and feels harder to the touch rather than like raw meat. And as you increase circulation, it's going out to the capillaries, it's kind of flooding. And
Hmm.
so I'm taking the time to explain this because that's why horses can suddenly start shaking their head, wanting to open the mouth or scissor the jaw or twist a little bit through the neck and head. And a lot of those are, they can often be sort of symptoms of relief more than they're a problem. But we go, why is my horse doing this? He never did this
So it's not a
before.
pain indication as much as it is a relaxation
Yeah, the
thing.
only kind of pain it would produce is really like if you go to a yoga class and you haven't done yoga, there's a little bit of pain involved in the stretch, or
Mhm.
like pins and needles when your foot is, you sat on your foot and you get up and your foot's asleep. And then that feeling of pins and needles as the circulation comes back into your foot.
Mhm.
That's sort of why I think horses get really itchy. Like they'll turn around and bite themselves on the shoulder. They'll kind of act like they're itchy or they'll scratch their front legs. And it's very common as the muscle tone is changing,
Mhm.
where, and especially through the neck.
Will this happen in the pasture when like I've seen him shake his head as I've gone out to the pasture to get him.
So,
And
and that's the reason it's good to have the vet come and look, because
okay.
the other reason they can start shaking their head is they can have issues with their eye, sinus issues or sinus infections, which can be related to a bad tooth, even ear infections, things like that. So, getting the vet to have a look is important, especially if he's
Okay.
doing it in the pasture or if it's kind of steadily gotten worse.
Okay.
Like if it's not just, it might be dramatic at first when you increase circulation, but if it's kind of persisting and not getting gradually better, it's getting gradually worse, that can be a medical issue. And
Okay.
so it's good to have the vet look, but the reason I emailed that to you was because if the vet can't find anything,
Hmm.
then there is sort of a thing in the horse business where we label something as a syndrome because we have no explanation.
Yeah.
And so if it comes down to being called head shaking syndrome, then I would just kind of hang with the work you're doing and see if it doesn't dissipate over time.
Okay. Well,
Eh,
can a horse who's going through these changes, will they shake when they're in the pasture, like before they've been ridden, or does it only happen during
It
riding?
can, because a lot of times too, like when you're guiding the body back towards the use it was intended to have. So everything about biomechanics is understanding the design of the body so that our training is guiding towards using the body the way it was intended. And
Hmm.
the skull, spine, rib cage, and pelvis as the axial skeleton is directing the use of all four limbs, all the muscle use, all the tendon, ligaments, and joints. And so when you start to move a horse that direction, it feels so good in many ways, even if it's a little uncomfortable or they struggle or they have weird issues, they typically are trying to hold the changes because it brings so much relief. So it wouldn't be unusual for a horse to, like I call it, practicing in the pasture or doing their homework, where they're still exploring their body and
Hmm.
trying to find these changes.
Okay.
And
Okay.
let me know if I carry on too long with my explanations. I get a
Okay.
little,
No, I found it interesting. So
okay.
that's good. Okay, I appreciate that. I'll be sure and get in touch with the vet and see what she says too.
Yeah, because it can be, like I said, sinus infection, eye issue. Horses that have uveitis or uveitis
Mhm.
starting will do a lot of head shaking. So it's good to get the eyes, teeth, and sinuses checked.
Okay.
Um, And let me share the screen and let me pull up the last video you just sent first, and we'll look at the first video if we need to. I have that pulled up as well. Let me go to a full screen.
Yeah, and one of your lessons that I watched online, I think it was with your good friend that you do podcasts with. She was saying how she lunges her mare because she can't ride her trot.
Yeah.
And so I thought that I would do that with my horse because he just blows right through my aids at the trot.
Yeah. Yeah. So the lunging is like I look at lunging and say work in a round pen or liberty work is really a time for a horse to explore with very little guidance from us. If we're
Mm-hmm.
doing groundwork with like long reins or the carpentry system, it's more guidance in the groundwork. And when we ride, we're always, even how we balance is guidance. So the
Mm-hmm.
head
Okay.
shaking I'm seeing on the lunge line is as he puts his head down and he stays in trot. That to me looks like what I'm used to seeing. It
Yeah, I
doesn't look
don't consider that head shaking. I just think he's just going up and down, trying to
yeah.
get comfortable.
Yeah, and what I like seeing at the trot on the lunge line is without a rider on about this size circle, the up and down of the neck, it's like he's holding himself pretty straight and he can find enough engagement to let go of the neck pretty often. He doesn't hold it for a long time, which tells you he loses the stability through his hindquarters. And that's what makes him put the neck back up. And then it looked
Okay.
like he was going to have a little hoo-ha. But the gentle sort of side to side nodding he was doing while his neck was going up and down, that to
Mm-hmm.
me, it looks like what I'm talking about. Sort of the
Oh,
circulation
okay.
increasing.
Okay. Well, yeah, he does much more vigorous head shaking than that, just
Okay,
when he's but can I ask you a few questions about the lunging
sure.
part of things? Okay. He towards the front left of your screen is where his pasture gate is down that little way. So he's always bulging towards that part of the ring. And I'm having to work on him listening to me because he just wants to do that. And so our circles, when we lunge, are not round. He always bulges out around that corner. And so, how important is it that his circles are round?
It depends on the exercise. So if I'm giving support as a rider or with supportive groundwork, then my circle is going to be round because I'm giving support. When I just have a horse on a lunge line or at liberty, the point of that type of exercise is for the horse to discover balance and to discover changes in their use. So if he's bulging out and falling in, yes, his mind is wandering, but also you can't have a distraction and maintain balance. So it's both at the same time. So when the circle is not round, that's related to the sort of alignment of the spine and rotation. So internally, he's having an issue stabilizing his straightness. And then the neck sort of going up and down can be related to the straightness and or related to remaining stable and engaged through the hindquarters.
Okay.
So on lunging, I actually just sort of like feed out the lunge line or shorten it up and let them do their thing because as they improve balance, what we see is they choose a rounder circle because they're
Okay.
holding their own balance. And the same thing with the rhythm. If they're going really fast or they're going really slow, I sort of let them choose the speed. And if they're really lethargic, I'll play with upward transitions to trot and canter. But if they're really wild, I'll spend more time at the walk, helping them calm down and do fewer upward transitions. I don't
Mhm.
really care if they maintain any gait other than the walk, because the transitions are where you're going to build the balance.
Okay.
And so if he's maintaining trot sort of because he thinks he has to, then he might need a downward transition to sort of stabilize his straightness or find some stability. And then as he goes between walk and trot, you might see the circle get rounder.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So I should do transitions during our trot work on the lunge line. Um,
I love transitions. Most people, it kind of drives them crazy because, um, sorry, I'm adjusting my sound. Um, because we think maintain gait, maintain direction is the priority. But if a horse needs to rebalance or restabilize, they tend to naturally make a downward transition. So what I do on the lunge line is my job is the upward transitions based on whether they need more energy or they need less energy.
he
And
rarely needs more energy. He's very forward.
okay, so if I use the whip and it looks like that's what you're doing in the video, because I don't really see you pushing him with the whip a lot. Your whip is low. You're kind of dragging the tip of it around.
Yeah,
And
I use that primarily to try and keep him out on the
okay,
circle, which
so
makes him go faster. He doesn't go out, he just goes faster. So,
yeah, and typically when they're falling in, like when horses veer in on the circle, it's because they lost balance. And so the torso is tilting in, the body weight's tilting in. And in that case, you can use that opportunity. If you ask for a transition to canter, it will help him rebalance and go back out on the circle. Or if he's at walk,
okay.
ask for a transition to trot. So instead of pushing him outward, push him forward and let him fix his own straightness.
Okay.
And then if he gets kind of excited, just hang on to the lunge line, wait for a transition down to trot, even wait for him to transition to walk,
Hmm.
because what takes the excitement out of the trot or canter, if he's pretty forward going, is allowing downward transitions whenever he chooses, and then
Okay.
time spent at the walk. So the downward transitions and the walk speed build calmness, and the upward transitions and the trot and canter speed build energy. So if you have
Okay.
too much energy, you spend more time at the walk. If you have too little energy, then you still allow the downward transitions, but the frequency or the timing of your upward transitions is what builds the energy.
Okay.
So
Okay.
if he's kind of lethargic, you can ask for trot and canter more often, but still let him transition all the way back to walk.
Okay.
And I kind of look at the lunge line as a time for the horse to just self-discover, because if we just keep them moving and playing with transitions, when a horse feels safe, the next thing they care about is feeling comfortable. So if I'm
Okay.
giving guidance, I'm trying to guide the body towards more comfort. But on the
Hmm.
lunge line, it's sort of a time for the horse to either blow out extra energy and or find comfort in their own way, which will
Okay.
it will always improve the balance, even if it's not a huge improvement.
Okay.
And
Um,
so the transitions are what build up the engagement and the strength of the hindquarter.
mhm.
The circle becoming round tells you how he's managing that internal straightness or not.
So even if it's oblong because he's mentally imbalanced and he wants to be someplace else, that's still the same thing.
Yeah,
Okay.
because the distraction, horses can't, it takes a lot of mental focus for them to change their coordination and
Mhm.
actually gain the proper coordination of the spine. That takes an intense amount of focus from the horse. So when they're distracted, they automatically revert into the posture of extension in that moment
Yeah.
because they get excited or they spook or they're looking or they're bending. And so they can't really physically be balanced and distracted at the same time. It's a one or the other. And so if
Okay.
you just kind of keep going, let him work through the distractions, playing with the transitions, what you'll see is once he puts his mind into the job of finding comfort, the circle gets rounder and the rhythm of the walk and the trot and the canter start to kind of balance between calmness and energy or energetic but stable.
Okay.
It's right. And so that's where the rhythm comes through, which is related to his front back balance, is figuring out between too fast, too slow.
Okay.
Right. And they
Okay.
experiment on both sides. And to me, that's the point of lunging is it's a safe environment. And I'm there with the whip to say, keep trying, keep practicing. But it's really up to them as a process of discovery on the lunge line because there's not much support you can give.
Yeah. Well, he can go on a small circle really fast. Um, and so I keep him on this smaller circle because once I let the lunge line out further, he just goes all over the place.
Yeah.
So is
So
this too small of a circle for him?
not at all. Not at
Can he
all.
canter on this size?
He could canter on this size or one of the, like if you think of walk and downward, increase calmness and stability. Upward transitions increase energy and pushing capacity. So every horse is going to have too much of one or the other, and the same horse is going to have the reverse, too much of one than the other. So they kind of bounce back and forth. So I'm always looking at the movement and I go, if it's on the lethargic side, then I'm going to play more often with canter. If it's on the excited side, I might just stick with walk and trot. And
Okay.
I might spend more time on the lunge line at walk until he's a little more settled and then start playing with trot transitions. And then if it looks reasonable, try a canter transition or two. And
Okay.
so
Yeah, because he just volunteers the trot. So I need to work on having him listen to me to walk.
So if he volunteers the trot, keep the circle the same size you're on because that will encourage him to slow down and just wait. You don't, I mean, that's like the laziest lunging ever, which is great for me. I go, I'm not going to do anything until a horse can walk for the first 5 minutes. If they're coming out and choosing to trot and canter, then if he gets carried away, keep making the circle smaller and smaller until he walks.
Okay.
And then until he can maintain a walk for like 5 minutes, what you're battling is the excess energy and the lack of self-control. His trot looks pretty reasonable. So there's no reason if he's trotting, you could just wait on that size circle until he chooses to walk. But I wouldn't ask for canter until he could choose to walk, because that
Okay.
just shows you the energy level's already too high.
Yeah, he's got lots of he's kind of stressed, I think. I think he just has been expected to just go, go, go. And so his answer to everything is faster.
Yes. Yes. And
Okay.
that's not uncommon. Let me go back and look at the size circle you're on. Yeah, because he
It's
can, yeah, I think that's a very reasonable circle for walk trot, and he could make a canter transition. He won't be able to hold the canter, but that's the point because you don't want him to blow up. You want him to relax into a canter transition, and then he'll learn to hold a reasonable canter. So I wouldn't make the circle any bigger just yet unless he's willing to maintain the walk.
okay. And then we haven't done much cantering because I have not had good control over him in the trot. But one of his problems is he has a hard time picking up his right lead. So should I just not even deal with that until?
I would just wait with everything you're telling me. I would really keep the canter transitions in reserve for now.
Okay, good.
And I
That's
would,
what I prefer to do.
yeah, I would just because, especially if he's having a hard time with one lead, that's a more significant issue with the straightness and the engagement. So I
Okay,
would just sort of work on walk trot about the size circle you're on. If he chooses to trot, just do nothing and wait for him to walk. Unless
okay,
if he gets carried away like that last little bit on the video where he looks like he's about to bolt, um, then I would kind of reel him in on the lunge line
Hmm.
and just make the circle smaller until he chooses to walk. So that
Okay.
way you're not having to bump his head too much. You're not having to try to cut the motion. You're just letting him wind his way down to the walk.
Okay.
But walk and trot,
Okay.
the size you're on looks very reasonable.
Okay. That's good. So I don't think he likes lunging because as soon as we start, he gets kind of rambunctious and wild, like, I don't want to do this. I want to go have fun. So just kind of hang with them and let him work
Let him work
through
through
that
it
and teach
because,
him this is his job.
well, and a lot of horses, like he just looks like he's very traditionally trained in sort of the dressage vein. And a lot of people lunge horses by constantly pushing them with the whip, or they think they're balancing the horse by increasing speed. And once the speed exceeds the horse's ability to be stable, they start panicking. And if they're not allowed to make downward transitions, they can't find stability within the trot. So they either have to buck or bolt or go fast as they can to seek stability because they'll end up using momentum if you punish them for making downward transitions. I
Yeah.
find within one session, as soon as that kind of horse figures out that the downward transitions are acceptable, they start choosing them more frequently. And they
Okay.
just calm right down and they lose all their anxiety about being lunged. And what you could do is like let him walk if he chooses the trot when he breaks to walk finally, let him walk for like 5 minutes before you even
Okay.
ask for an upward transition. And that will also take the pressure off of him and help him just enjoy being lunged.
Okay. So then how long should his lunge sessions be? I've only been doing like 5 minutes each rein.
No,
Um,
it'll take him, if you want to work through problems on the lunge, you're going to need a whole hour. If you want to use it, once it gets good, you can use it as a 5 minute warm up, 10-minute warm up. But if you want to improve the movement or you need to work through defensive behavior, which is what he's doing, then you need at least, like, he won't even get to the point where he relaxes for the first 10 minutes.
okay.
And once he goes through his shenanigans for the first 10 minutes and you don't react, then the second 10 minutes is where he starts learning. And then if you go another 10 minutes after that, he starts seeking comfort. And so that would be 30 minutes one direction and then change and do 30 minutes the other direction. And
Okay.
there is nothing that calms an anxious horse down faster than a really long walk. And
Okay.
if they choose to go faster, I go, that's on you. I'm not going to ask you for it. You're welcome to walk at any time, and that's all I'm asking for. So that way, if they go faster than a walk, they're blowing out whatever pent up energy they have, but I'm not contributing to the problem.
Okay. So if he gets tired of that, he does not like repetition. So I can just to see him after like 5 minutes, him looking at his watch, thinking, when are we going to be finished? And then him
Yeah,
trying to find a way out. So just push him through that.
just keep asking. If he halts, ask for the walk. If he trots, wait for him to walk.
Okay.
And and just kind of you're the personal trainer. You're the motivator to say, keep going. That's the
Okay.
whole purpose of being there on the lunge line because he won't do that in the pasture. When we provide food and water, they never walk or trot long enough to really get good at it. And then when we're riding, we're adding weight and we're adding aids, so they
Mhm.
don't always own their own movement.
Oh, that's
A-
interesting. Yeah, it makes sense. Okay.
yeah. And so that to me is the reason I lunge is to let the horse go through a process of discovery that they would not do on their own,
Yeah. So
right?
then after I lunge for an hour, how long am I going to ride him then?
You could maybe do 20 minutes each way on the lunge line and then ride, I mean, if this guy has so much energy, if you're mostly working on balance and you're
Hmm.
really working on calming him down, helping him find his balance, only walk and trot, I think you could safely have an hour and a half to a 2 hour session with this guy from the looks of it. It doesn't
Okay.
look it doesn't look like he's going to tire out easily.
Yeah.
When you're working on, and that's with breaks of sort of, if he's really starting to resist going forward, that might be a sign of fatigue. If
Okay.
he's, if you feel like he's not getting better and better through the ride and he starts to feel worse and worse towards the end, that's a sign of fatigue. And you could
Okay.
kind of call it quits there.
But
But
what if he just mentally says, I'm tired of this. I want to go back to the barn. Like, how do
well,
I
here's
know
here's
different?
two things. The only two things that are really important to horses is that they feel safe and that they feel comfortable.
Hmm.
So as long as our training session is giving him more and more of those two things, they quit seeking the barn.
Okay.
The reason they seek the barn is because they don't feel safe or they don't feel comfortable. And so what they're looking for is the safety and security of the stall, the herd members, because they love working. They love having a job if they feel safe with their human, if they feel safe doing what you ask, and if they physically feel balanced enough to feel the benefit of the work, to feel comfort within the work. And that
Okay.
becomes its own reward.
Okay.
So typically, when horses are always trying to get back to the barn, it's sort of their way of telling us with brutal honesty that they either don't feel safe or they're not feeling comfortable in the work we're doing. So
Okay. Yeah. Oh,
if
go
we
ahead.
if we adjust our work program, sort of listening to that guidance and patient persistence, just go, hey, I'm really trying to help you feel safe, help you feel comfortable. They do
Hmm.
kind of switch where they look forward to the work and they're no longer trying to drag you back to the barn because they're feeling the benefit of their time with you.
Okay. Yeah, he has a weird personality. And I think that he might not have been like actively abused, but I think he's been ignored most of his training. He's been passed around. And so he doesn't connect with me personally like my other horses have. So I don't
Yeah.
think he trusts me yet.
This horse
But
has he's been pushed to perform while he's been uncomfortable
yeah, I
to,
can see that.
yes, and to the point that it started to make him unstable enough that he started to feel unsafe.
Okay,
So,
that makes sense.
yeah. And so his is really a physical issue, but anything you're seeing behaviorally is because he was sort of worked in, like he's athletic, he's strong, and so he could do what people asked, even if he was completely dysfunctional in his body. And that's true of a lot of performance horses. They will do the task, they'll do the show, but they're not really, it's a slow taxing of the body rather than a slow building of the body.
Yeah. Okay, so just keep with what I'm doing and just make him more comfortable. It will make him more comfortable as his body adjusts.
Yes.
Okay.
And if he fatigues because he's working new muscles or because the circulation is changing through the muscles, then what you feel is he'll get it. Like when I first start a session, I get all of my shenanigans and my worst movement the first part of the ride. As soon as I get on, the first 10 minutes, that's why we do warm-ups, is because that's the worst movement of the ride.
Hmm.
And I start my work right away and progressively through the ride, the horse gets lighter to my aids. I need less frequent aids. The horse is holding the posture change or holding the straight path easier and easier. And then if
Hmm.
the horse starts to physically fatigue, it goes back towards what it felt like in the warm up.
Okay.
Okay, so as soon as I now have to give more aids, stronger aids, more frequent aids, the horse is really harder to steer or harder to get forward or harder to slow down. If that's happening at the midpoint of my planned session or past, then that's fatigue.
Okay. That's a good indicator.
Yeah. And at that point I go, I just get off even if I'm ending on a bad note because it's fatigue.
Okay.
It's
Yeah.
not going to get any better.
Okay. So lunge him for an hour and then ride for an hour or
You
even an hour
could
and a half.
if he's having a day where he's super high energy, that and the whole purpose of working that long, but a lot of walk time and only trot is kind of a slow, like taking that shaken up soda bottle and releasing that cap slowly. So
Okay.
you don't get the big fizz release. It's like you're letting the fizz out, all that pent up energy or fear energy. Anxiety is fear energy. So if you
Hmm.
see anxiety, rushing, not willing to walk, that's both physical and mental emotional.
Yeah.
So you're kind of letting him release the energy through physical movement, but trying to get him not to just blow up and then be tired. It's
Okay.
like,
So just make him walk, even if he gets prancy and wants to go forward, just try and get him to walk.
yeah, or if you can ride, if he offers you trot under saddle like he does on the lunge line, if you're comfortable and you feel safe riding it, then I would put that energy on an inward spiraling circle and make him work,
Okay.
right? I would
Well,
use the energy.
I can do that. This is one of my list of questions I had is um I can do that, but I'm going to have to use a lot of rein, a lot of leg because he just wants to bulge out the whole time or fall in the whole time, depending on which rein. So I feel
So,
like it's not really producing what your teaching is it's supposed to produce because I'm fighting the whole time.
well, think of it this way. If it's that hard to keep him on a circle that's precise, then you can look at developing internal straightness is the same on every single potential path of travel.
Mhm.
So think of your path of travel is different than the straightness related to balance. So if you're having to really over effort to keep him internally straight on a precise path, then I would not worry if my path is precise.
Okay.
I would start to work with, is his pole and neck lined up to my seat bones, even though he just blew through my legs and we're on a different path?
Okay.
Does that make
Um,
sense?
yeah, but let me ask you this. Okay, so we've been working on, this corner of the ring there where he wants to go. And like even in these walk, even at the walk, I'm trying to keep him straight, trying to turn him like, kind of a turn on the haunches,
Yep.
keep him straight kind of thing. But you don't see it as much unless I guess you probably see it, but like his weight is still going the other way. And so I was trying to sit more to the inside so that my weight would carry him more, but I see in my video I'm just leaning. And so after this video, I decided if he wasn't listening to my aids and actually turning, I stopped him, which took some effort because he doesn't like to stop.
Yeah.
And then I would physically make him do a step over and then I'd reward him. And so that seemed to be better. But I was doing that every single turn because he just was not listening to me.
It's not that he's not listening
So
to
at the
you.
trot, it would just,
So at the trot, you couldn't manage it?
it's the thing, you can't do it. Well, at the trot, it would just be more, it would be more of a fight probably,
Yeah.
depending on where he was mentally at the moment.
Yes. So let me see if I can clarify some of this because when like that's what you're talking about right there.
Yeah,
Was
yeah,
yeah.
I think so.
Okay. Yeah, and it's a good way to handle it. And you're handling all of this well. So when I look at the video, I go, I don't see you giving obvious aids, even if you feel like you're working hard. So that's good. I see him lengthening his neck really pretty often, a little bit of struggle, but he's mostly finding length through his neck and top line from what you're doing with your seat and your reins, right?
Mhm.
So the path of travel is only related to internal straightness in that a horse that is stable and straight internally is going to have a lengthened neck, whether it's long and low or long and level or long and elevated. Those are different degrees of lifting the back. But the
Mhm.
length of the neck means the alignment and the rotation are stabilized.
Okay.
Now, if he's veering on and off the path of travel, then it needs more stability because that's where the steering becomes related to the internal straightness. If the internal straightness is kind of just starting to, like, he's just learning it and he doesn't really have the core muscle support to stabilize it yet,
Mhm.
then the steering will be really difficult because the internal straightness is hard for him to stabilize and sustain.
Okay.
Even though you're getting it, every time he voluntarily lengthens the neck, you've gotten the bones of the spine in the right place. But if it's new to him, he might not have the core strength to really hold it and maintain it. So he ends up kind of veering on your path of travel a little bit,
Okay.
right? So the lengthening of the neck tells you got it internally and what you feel under your seat and in your reins. And then the path of travel means he's really stabilized it and it's getting easy for him. Does that make sense? So at this point, you can kind of use the path of travel more for you than him. Like if visually are looking at your path of travel and he's starting to gravitate to the left of your intended path, then I might check, do I need to sit on my left seat bone? Do I need left rein? Do I need right rein? Because he's lost internal straightness by losing the steering, even if
Mhm.
he didn't shorten his neck.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? He just lost
Yeah,
the
it does.
stability of it.
So then just use whatever amount of pressure on my seat or my rein to get him to go where he needs to go. Because this
Or,
there's no fence here. Like he would just wander off into the grass if if I
right.
didn't keep.
So let me put this back just a smidge because I feel like this horse, and with everything you've talked about, that there's a few moments, yeah, I think right in here, and then as he comes back around, that nose in the dirt version of long and low right now is where I feel it's the most authentic mechanical change in his body. That for him to find his hind legs, to find the engagement and stabilize the hindquarter and really release, lengthen the top line muscles all the way to the tail. I feel
Mhm.
like that's actually the version of long and low where he achieves that. But because it's an extreme version of long and low, it's going to be really hard to steer him in that posture. So you're gaining the benefit internally, but it's not yet sort of stable and it's a little extreme. So the steering could feel frustrating to you. He's going to be heavy and hard to steer in that version of long and low.
Well, actually, though, he's easier to steer when he's long and low. It's when his mind is determined that he wants to leave the ring and his head comes up is when he fights with me.
Okay, that makes sense then. So maybe in any version of lengthening the neck, when the steering feels easier, it's always 100% because the internal straightness, which is two spinal functions, became more stable, and that
Mhm.
the hindquarters are engaged to a minimal degree. And so if he has those internal coordinations, the steering should feel easier. If he's
Mhm.
not yet able to sort of stabilize that muscularly, then he'll feel a little wobbly or the steering won't be so easy. But if he
Okay.
feels easier, then he's got enough core strength that what I would look at doing is when you start, steer him when you have to keep him in the arena. But
Mhm.
otherwise, maybe let him wander a bit in the warm up and just focus on, is his poll and neck lined up to my seat bones? Am I level under the saddle? So when a horse has a rotation, like when the rotation becomes unstable, which is a twisting action of the spine,
Mhm.
right? So when we twist, we are rotating the spine left and right like this. When
Mhm.
a horse twists the spine, we're sitting on the barrel over the spine. So to us, it feels like rolling
Mhm.
from our perspective. And so if the rotation of his spine becomes unstable, if the dorsal like spinous processes tilt to the left, you're going to feel upward pressure on your right seat bone,
Hmm.
right? And so you put your weight against the upward pressure that you feel, leaving room for him to straight get the spine upright again. Because
Okay.
what you're basically sitting against with your body weight to correct the rotation is you're actually sitting on a tight back muscle. That's what makes the high side of the saddle. The
Okay.
bones and the body weight are going the opposite direction.
Hmm.
And so you're basically putting your body weight, just like if you were in a canoe and the canoe started tipping left, you wouldn't put your body to the left. You would put your body
Hmm.
to the right.
Okay, so if we're traveling, this is most common on his left rein, and I want to turn left, but his body is bent left but falling right, then I put more weight in my right seat bone so
It
that,
depends
oh,
because it depends. You have to feel it moment to moment
okay.
because it's very possible for horses to make a left turn with too much rotation, which would be the dorsal spinous processes too far left while you're tracking left. You could also have a horse that has inverted rotation, which means the dorsal tips of the spine go right when you track left. You
Hmm.
can also, when they drop the back, a you get what's called hyper rotation, where it's a back and forth, side to side, right? So all of
Okay.
those types of rotation are possible, and you really don't know and what you're feeling for in the turn is number one, if he's bending the neck left, he could be dropping the back away from your left seat bone, pushing on the right, or
Hmm.
he could be doing the reverse. He could be pushing up on your left seat bone, dropping you on the right.
Yeah, I felt those. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
So regardless, I want to put weight in the seat bone that he's pressing up against.
always. And it can
Okay.
change even on the same
Yeah.
horse. And that's why the instruction of inside leg to outside rein is useless because what if the horse needs you on the opposite rein or the opposite seat bone? Because that's
Yeah.
unique and it's dynamic and it's completely unpredictable.
Okay. That
Even
helps
on
a
the,
lot.
yeah, even on the same horse, it's unpredictable. And when they start to change their balance, it becomes even less predictable. Right now, he
Yeah.
might have a pattern that you figure out. Every time we track left, he always pushes up on my right seat bone, or he always pushes up on my left seat bone. Once
Hmm.
you get that sorted out, he may switch. So
Yeah.
that's why you have to kind of feel it as you go. So the
Okay.
internal straightness always means he's not pushing up on one side or the other, that it's easy for you to keep your seat level because he's not creating upward, downward force on one side of your body or the other. That's when you know
Yeah.
his rotation is stable, right?
Okay.
That's what we feel through the barrel and through our seat, torso, and legs. The lateral
Hmm.
bending, we really can see and feel through the neck more than the torso. So what you're describing where he's bending left and track and kind of drifting right is really an escape through the outside shoulder.
Yeah.
So that's an overbend. What you have to do is
Yeah.
straighten. And if you almost tip his nose to the right, you get the steering back.
Well, except he still wants to go to the right. He's just very hard-headed, but um, I think stopping him and making him do those little turns seems to
Yeah,
work best for now. So
and and
if
for
that's okay, then I'll do that.
that's fine. And another strategy is to sort of alternate your rein aids where your inside rein is a little bit of a leading rein that you're
Mhm.
opening in the direction of travel, but your opposite rein is a straightening rein that you're kind of using the hand back towards your torso. So
Yeah,
in
I've done
other
that
words,
too.
you would lead and straighten and lead and straighten as you're going through the turn, which is a little
Yeah.
tricky on the timing but it does work very well because he either wants to turn with his neck too bent, which is why he's losing his balance and drifting right. And he feels uncooperative, I think mostly because he can't figure out how to do it. And
Okay.
so let me circle back to like your warm up. What you could experiment with is only steer when you have to and
Okay.
spend the first maybe 10 or 15 minutes of your ride. Just let, if he's willing to maintain the walk and he's safe, if he tries to leave the arena, then okay, pick up the rein, turn him around and steer. But then try to spend your warm-up time letting him choose his speed and choose his path of travel while you focus 100% on the neck alignment, the levelness of the saddle, and just kind of feeling that internal straightness to the point that he can hold a lengthened neck for more and more and more strides together.
Okay.
Okay.
I can do
And that way, if he has the time to choose his own path of travel, what you'll feel is wherever his weight is shifting is where he's going to go.
that.
And so it kind of helps you understand, oh, he's shifting his weight right. That's why he's going right. Or he's shifting his weight left. That's why he's going left. Or he's shifting his weight so much to the left. That's why he's drifting to the right. Because all of those things are possible.
Okay, so when I feel that, and I can feel it coming, that weight shift, um, uh,
The,
what
w-
do I do
the,
to keep it from escalating?
the weight shift is always going to also produce, it's symbiotic. So when they lose the spinal alignment or the stable rotation, that's what causes the weight shift. As they
Okay.
as they shift weight, it also increases any lateral bending and rotation through the spine. So it's kind of a
Okay.
double whammy. And it's a little bit chicken and egg because the loss of stability through the spine is what created the asymmetrical weight shift. But once they make the asymmetrical weight shift, it's now going to even destabilize the spine further. So that's
Yeah,
why I'm saying if you kind of, because if you think of letting him choose the path of travel, there's no wrong path of travel,
right.
right? So I go on every potential path of travel, you could stabilize internal straightness. And as the internal straightness gets more stable on a variety of paths that we let him choose, then when you start steering from your seat and leg, you'll already feel it's easier.
Okay, that makes sense. So you're saying that his spine gets out of line first, and that's why he chooses he really can't turn when I ask him to, because I've like down at the very far side of the ring coming towards the camera is when I can feel it starting.
Yeah.
And so I need to address it down that long side.
And I would say to
Um,
get familiar because it's sort of two different skills. If you separate internal straightness related to his balance is one thing. A path of
mhm.
travel, any path of travel is a separate thing.
Yeah,
And if you
okay.
make them separate, it'll really help you start to feel that he's not being resistant for no reason. He's being resistant because he lost his balance.
That helps a lot.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so the harder you're working as a rider is always indicating to me how much the horse is struggling to find the correct use of the body and stability in that way. And
Okay.
so when we're working really hard as a rider, to me, that's just a big indicator of how bad the balance is.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mhm.
Okay, so then after this 15-minute warm up, what am I going to do the rest of the 45
What I would
minutes?
say is you can play with walk and trot transitions without steering. You
Okay.
could try steering, and if it really makes you struggle, then you could abandon ship and go back to letting him choose the path of travel. You could go in and out of those two modes. It doesn't have to be now we do this. And
Okay.
so anytime you feel like, wow, I am really working too hard and I don't seem to be effective, then allowing him to choose his speed and choose his own path of travel always allows you to focus 100% on improving the balance. And
Okay.
and the better the balance gets, the easier the steering gets,
Okay.
right? And
Uh,
the easier even the speed adjustments become, the more solid his balance is. So, like here in the video right now, his nose is on the dirt and it looks like he's falling left a little bit. No problem. If you keep him straight and level while he falls left, you don't lose the balance, but you do lose the steering.
okay.
Does that make sense? And we're
Yes.
sort of trained to think we have to keep the steering in order to keep the balance. And they're not really the same thing.
Okay.
Because if I keep the balance, and I do it, I'll do it sometimes with horses that are really struggling. I may have a full hour session of being what I call kind of a, you're not a complete passenger, but I call it more of a passenger ride because my job is the balance and they get to choose their speed and direction as long as it's
Okay.
safe. As long as it's safe. I go, of course, if he's full of shenanigans, correct that. But as often as you can be passive, you start to feel the internal balance. And this posture right here, if he's drifting a little left or right, you're building the muscles that stabilize the spine internally, even if you're giving up a little bit on the path of travel.
Okay. And so if I were to try this at the trot, I'm which I feel safe on him.
Hmm.
He's not unsafe, except that he just goes super fast and I
Yeah.
have a hard time like staying with him.
No, and
So
that's
I
the
can,
thing. As soon as you start to feel unstable, it's not helping anything. And so if he's kind of rushing in the trot to the point that you can't get yourself quietly stable, then you have to steer. And I would just put him on a circle rather than trying to make him slow down. That's
and
when
if he
I'm
takes that circle really fast, just what do I do?
just keep spiraling in on the circle to the point that if he slows down a little and it's a more manageable trot for you to ride, then you found the size you need. And then it's a
Okay.
matter of kind of staying on that size circle until he chooses walk. And the only reason, if it's unsafe, of course, use the reins, do what you need to. But if it's not unsafe, when you can teach a horse to slow down by letting sort of the dynamics of a circular path do their thing, what he's learning in the process, even if it takes a while, if I can ride it, I ride it down to the walk on a circle without the rein resistance because he's learning how to use what's called the braking mechanism of his body. He's learning self-control within forward motion in that process. And that is the problem he has. He has lots of forward energy. He's self-propelled, but he's not self-controlled.
Okay. Well, I would love to try this. But let me tell you, well, I have tried it, and these are the problems I'm having. He goes really fast at a trot on a smaller circle than this. And to get him to turn, I have to use the inside rein because he just won't listen to my aids. And so we're just going around really fast and he's just overbent and he just seems
So,
unproductive.
so there's like, think of it this way. There's a purpose to that, even though he's losing balance in the process. The only purpose of allowing that to keep going is for him to learn how to slow himself down from trot to walk, which is
Okay.
related to hindquarter engagement, lifting the back, and balancing impulsion. He's losing his balance in the process. So you kind of go, how much of this do I really want to do? And is it working?
Yeah.
Right? If it's
Right.
working, if he can get to the walk that way, and it's sort of reasonable, like we're talking within 3 sessions of kind of it took, like if it takes him 10 minutes to find the walk, but it's a trot you can hang with, then it's not going to destroy him to have him overbent for that purpose of teaching him. It's your job to slow down. It's not my job to rate your speed.
Wow. Okay. So I can just let him have at it for 10 minutes
If you
and
can
see what
ride
happens.
it, yeah, and it
Okay.
kind of it feels like forever when you're in the middle of it. But if you
Well, I
I
just feel like it's going to damage him in some way because he's going really fast, really in
yeah,
a
and
small
so
circle.
it's kind of like he's already unstable. So as soon as you
Mhm.
use the rein and it goes to the point of bending the neck and you get on a reasonable size circle, like the size you were lunging on, if he's still rushing on that size circle, but you can manage to ride it, it's not so small that you're going to do damage, but it's not
Okay.
so big that it's just letting him run willy-nilly. He has to start thinking about slowing down or breaking gait in order to find comfort. And
Okay.
when we step in too soon, they never really experience the consequence of their own decision. And
Okay.
it's always with the caveat that it needs to be reasonably, even because we know they're losing balance. We don't want it to be extreme. It needs to be a reasonable thing that we can ride for, say, a reasonable amount of time. If he didn't slow down within an hour, we have to definitely change strategies. It,
Okay.
if it takes him even a half an hour to slow down from trot to walk, then we need to maybe look at a different tweaking the strategy we've talked about. If it only takes him 10 minutes, which feels like forever, right? So wear a
Yeah.
watch and start
Okay.
timing it because it feels like forever. But if you look at your watch and it really only took, 5, 10, 15 minutes for him to find the walk, that to me is a reasonable amount of time within that
Okay.
dysfunctional use. It's not going to hurt him and he's going to learn something. And so that would be kind of what I would look at. And if it's so,
Okay.
and I kind of think I would be surprised if it even took him 10 minutes.
Yeah. Well, I've never ridden them more than just like a few times around because I was afraid that it was just not productive. But okay, so what is my seat? I mean, I'm trying to trot slow, but he just throws me everywhere. So I'm just trying to just stay with him, and I'm hoping that my seat is not so fast to keep up with him that it doesn't allow him to slow down. You know what I mean? Like,
Well, the purpose of the rising trot is when a horse has a bad trot, they
mhm,
bounce us so hard that we cannot be stable. So the
mhm,
purpose of a rising trot is always to stabilize our body. It
mhm.
doesn't do anything for the horse. I mean, it makes it easier on them because we're stable. So as long as he's bouncing you around, just post matching his speed. So if he's trotting
Okay.
fast, it's going to be kind of a quick post because he's throwing you out of the saddle, right?
Yeah.
And if he slows down, you post slower, but that's also how you'll feel him incrementally start to control his speed. You'll feel it through your rising trot. And the whole point of it is if you're the one that has to keep him slow, there's no way you're going to get authentic lifting of the back from that point. He has to have
Interesting.
some self-regulation over his speed.
Okay.
And the reason that's important is because the lifting of the back, and I don't want to go too far into the weeds because we've talked about a lot, but it's basically the muscles of the back and the hindquarter and the phase of leg strides all have annoyingly the same scientific term, right? So it's called braking, which is just like the brakes in your car, brake, and it's related to deceleration within forward motion. That's how horses find stability, right?
Okay.
The pushing mechanism is the accelerator. So half of the leg, every single leg stride half of the back muscles, half of the hindquarter muscles are working in a braking capacity, while the other half of everything is in a pushing capacity. And it's when
Mhm.
those two uses of the body, as well as stride of the hind leg, equalize. That's what lifts the spine upward.
Mhm.
So they don't lift their back by going too fast or too slow. It's always an ever-changing equalization of that use of their body. And so
Mhm.
right now, what we're talking about is the first baby step in that direction. He lacks braking capacity. He's
Yes.
weak in the braking capacity. That's why he rushes. So
Mhm.
as long as people slow down a horse to rate the speed manually, they never
Mhm.
develop the braking muscles,
Interesting. Okay.
right? So that's the
Yeah.
purpose of letting him go through some dysfunctional use of his body until he chooses the walk, is
Okay.
because that's beginning to teach him you need to find the muscles that not only slow you down, but also stabilize your body and lift your back,
Yeah.
right?
That makes sense. Okay.
And so it's a
Okay.
little ugly when they're at that phase, but if it's not lasting longer than 10 minutes, I wouldn't worry too much about it.
Okay. And so let him, so, okay, I'm going to be walking for 15 minutes and just letting him go where he wants and trying to keep him stable. And then try and do some trotting without steering and see if that works. But if that doesn't work, put him on a small circle. And then once I do that,
Wait for
um,
him to walk.
wait
Yep.
to
So when
walk.
you put him
Okay.
on the small circle, you're letting, if he sort of rushes at the trot, the purpose of starting to steer is putting him on a circle until he walks. And then once he's
Okay.
walking again, if that was a bit dramatic and it took 10 minutes for him to go from trot to walk, then I would walk for another 15 minutes before I would
Okay.
even try the next trot.
Okay. And then go on the other rein and try it on that rein.
Well, if you're not steering, it doesn't matter.
Well, another trot circle, I mean.
If
Like,
you, yeah, if you have to circle him at trot, you can switch reins each time.
okay.
Yeah. And
Okay.
And what you're trying to teach him is not to rush at the trot. That's why you're steering him onto a circle, even if he bends his neck and tilts and rushes and all of that. Once he starts to figure out it's his job to get himself back to the walk, you're going to
Uh-huh.
have the opposite problem. It will be hard to get him to trot.
Okay.
And they all go back and forth like that. They have too much energy, not enough energy, too much braking, not enough braking. And that's how they learn to balance. So if he's going into a trot that takes a long time, hard to ride, you have to put him on a circle, takes him 10 or 15 minutes to come to walk, then don't ask for trot very often and
Okay.
spend more time at the walk working on the balance, even if you're not steering. So like
Okay.
that would be him telling me, maybe I just need to get the balance and maybe a little bit of steering going at the walk to improve the balance overall before we visit the trot too often.
Okay, that makes sense. So then for my walk, do I let him do I walk without steering the whole rest of the time when we're not trotting, or do I put him on a circle at walk? What should we do about that?
What I would do to start with is try the steering, like do your 15 minutes of walk without steering.
Hmm.
Then start thinking, I wonder if we could do a figure eight or a straight line or a circle or balance through this corner or just get from
Okay.
point A to point B. But the second you're over efforting, when you have to really use a heavy leg or a heavy rein in order to get the steering, then I would abandon ship and go back to just not steering, but focusing on the balance.
Okay.
And as you go in and out of that, what you're going to find is he's the one guiding you to how much time he needs choosing the path of travel. Because as soon as he's stable, the steering is easy.
Okay.
And so
You know
if
what,
it's
Kirsten, I've got to tell you, that is so encouraging because I've this whole time thought I've had this hard-headed, obstinate horse that I
no,
thought, I don't like this guy. I want a horse that does what I want him to do. So it's
no,
so
and
nice
that's
to
why
know that.
that's part of the reason he's not enjoying the work either. If you're not
Yeah.
enjoying it, he's not enjoying it. And that's why he's dragging you back to the barn and doesn't want to, appears to be like not interested in working. So that's the discomfort I'm telling you about in work where they go, this sucks. I don't want to do it. And so
Uh-huh.
the way, because balance is for a horse, like teaching a person to ride a bike. Right. So
Okay.
if you think back to learning how to ride a bike or drive a car or drive a stick shift,
Hmm.
it's a little cumbersome and awkward. So we don't try to steer accurately when we're learning the coordination.
Hmm.
And you can't make somebody learn to ride a bike or drive a car. You can guide, but if that person gets scared or uncomfortable, they're not going to learn that coordination. So
Hmm.
it's the same for people as it is for horses. And so that's where if I'm really struggling to get a horse to listen to me, I go, is my horse scared or is my horse uncomfortable? And how do I make this easier? So
Okay.
what really expedites training is finding the path of least resistance, not finding the path of most resistance, which is what we're told, right?
Right. Tell them what to do. Be in charge. Yeah.
Be in charge, tell them what to do. If it's hard, you get harder, get a spur, get leverage, get the whip, all of those leverage devices are because the horse is trying to tell us this is too hard for me to balance right now. So I'm going to resist and I'm going
Hmm.
to protect myself from you, my rider, right? Not fun for either one of you. So if you think, how could I make this easier? Right? So you
Hmm.
have your path of travel and your riding performance, but you also have internal balance and feeling safe or feeling stable physically. So you can choose what would feel easier for me and this horse right now.
Hmm.
So if I give up the steering and I let him pick the speed, is it easier for him to maintain this posture of long and low? Does he start to feel more stable? Right? And if he feels better and he feels more stable, you go, let me try a right turn. It'll either work or it won't, but you don't
Yeah.
have to make it work. Do you know what I
Okay.
mean?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, because I guarantee a horse in balance, the whole reason we do this is because they're such a pleasure to ride.
Yeah.
And so
Well,
when
all
they're,
of,
go
go
ahead.
ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh,
You go
go
ahead.
ahead. Oh, okay. So anyways, like the ease of motion, and this is why I studied as hard as I did about the mechanics and worked at really getting it right. And how do we do it is letting the horse guide us a little bit. So
Hmm.
when I have fear or resistance to a level that I'm struggling, I go, okay, something is not working. How can I achieve a step towards my goal, but maybe take away one of these criteria that might be making it too hard? So how do I remove
Hmm.
something to make it easier and make the job simpler for my horse to be successful?
Hmm.
And so as you play with everything we've talked about today, that thought is really what will guide you to go, I think I'll spend more time doing this and less time doing that.
Oh yeah, that makes it so much easier to read the room, read the situation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And when you start communicating with your horse that way, they love that. And they
Hmm.
start to really enjoy the time working with you because they feel like you're listening.
Yeah, I can see that. Well, let me ask you this. If I don't have 2 hours with him, should I lunge him or ride him or do half and half, you know,
Oh,
abbreviated?
you could squash half and half into 1 hour or less,
Okay.
or you could decide the weather's bad. This is a day he just needs to blow it out. I'm going to lunge today and not ride. Or
Okay.
I really am looking forward to this ride. Maybe we skip lunging. because
Oh,
you're
for a
at a
reason.
place like you don't have to lunge him in order to ride him. The lunging for him is the same thing you're doing by circling him with a bent neck until he slows himself down. It's like it's a process of discovery, but you don't need it to safely ride your horse. So,
Right.
so
Yeah.
you have options, and the maximum workout would be 2 hours, an hour of each. But you could opt and go, I only have 20 minutes. Maybe I'll lunge him quickly. Or I only have a half
Okay.
an hour and I really want to ride. And so you have
Okay.
all kinds of options because you're essentially working on the same thing, whether you're on the ground or under saddle.
Hmm.
And you're essentially sort of on the side of giving fewer aids rather than more guidance. I think that's what's going to work for both of you initially.
Yeah, I agree. I can, yeah.
Yeah. So on the
Um,
lunging, you don't give a lot of aids. And when you're doing this sort of passenger balanced riding, you're really not giving a lot of aids other than for the internal use of the body. So
okay.
that's why if you let him pick the speed and pick the direction, that saves you about, I don't know, 50% of your aids. You don't need them.
Yeah, right.
So all of your aids are now being geared towards this internal coordination.
Okay. Well,
And
I
you
just
can,
realized we're over to our time.
it's
So
fine. I
let
don't
you
mind.
go.
Yeah, but I know you probably have to go and I got stuff to do still. It looks like we have a storm coming in, so
Oh,
but does that kind of clarify
oh,
all
yes. I
okay.
can't tell you how thankful I am for finding you because I've read so much information about straightness and I've tried all these techniques and none of them have worked. And I was just Googling inverted rotation because I've read all of Jean-Luc's articles and
Yes.
finally you popped up on my Google search. I've searched for you for years.
Oh,
So hopefully this horse will not have a debilitating problem and I'll be able to keep going and
no,
um
and I kind of suspect because I think you guys are doing a great job and the rapidness at which the two of you are getting this stability and straightness and he's shifting into this deep, long, and low, I almost think because you're getting changes so rapidly is why he might be shaking his head because you're
okay.
really getting some significant it's a global change in the use of the body when you're going from extension to long and low. That's authentic, right? And that takes some time for the body to adapt to. So you've already, just watching the last video to this video, made huge improvements, and he has. And so that could just be his body hasn't quite caught up yet or adjusted yet to these changes.
Good. I hope so. So is there anything I should do to make him comfortable if that is his problem? Like,
The vet, if it's a physical problem that he's shaking his head because of ears, eyes, teeth, sinuses, the vet will know and the vet will tell you what to do. If the vet just sort of says syndrome without a real game plan or something to do, then I would continue working with him the way you are. And hopefully it should lessen, right?
okay, so no
It'll
like
be
massages or, warm baths or anything. Just let it work its way out.
I mean, when you curry him, if you go cross fiber, that can kind of help it along,
Okay.
but I go, I don't, you could pay for a massage or a body worker. It certainly wouldn't hurt, but I don't know that it's 100% necessary
Okay.
because he's really changing his posture, giving himself the body work.
Yeah.
And so the more you're encouraging calm and long and low, whether it's walk trot, whether it's lunging or riding, whether it's with or without steering, that's what's going to keep allowing the body to adapt to this kind of global change in the use of it's every single muscle, tendon, ligament, and joint. It's a big deal.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
No problem. It was a pleasure working with you and keep me
Thank you.
posted. Email. What I'll do is let me stop the recording. Hang on. Let me stop the share. Let me stop the recording.